God,
God,
I offer
I
myself to
pray
thee,
for
to build with me
fill with
and
me
do with
and
me
be
as
with me
thou
as
wilt.
thou wilt.
Relieve me
Relieve
of the
me
bondage
of
of
the
self,
bondage of
that
self,
I may better
that I
do
may
thy
better
will.
do thy will.
Take
Take
away
away
my
my
difficulties,
difficulties,
that
that
victory over
victory
them
over
may
them
bear witness
may
to
bear
those I would
witness
help
to those I
of
would
thy
help of
power,
thy power,
thy
thy
love,
love,
and
and
thy
thy
way of
way of
life.
life. May
May
I
I do
do
thy
thy
will
will always.
always.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. Well, as with our group, we aren't ready to get started at the beginning just yet. We're going to go ahead and review Dr. Bob's Nightmare. Our thought is that as one of the founders, it's always nice to hear his story, just like we do with Bill W. and listening to his story. So we're going to get started. It's on page 171, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and we will go from there. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. Page 171 is Theo said, Dr. Bob's Nightmare. A co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the birth of our society dates from his first day of permanent sobriety, June 10th, 1935. To 1950, the year of his death, he carried the AA message to more than 5,000 alcoholic men and women, and to all these he gave his medical services without thought of charge. In this prodigy of service, he was well assisted by Sister Ignatia at St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Ohio, one of the greatest friends our fellowship will ever know.
Yeah, so Dr. Bob was, we've heard his story previously as we've gone along with regard to his meeting with Bill W. and how that changed his life, how he had struggled for years and finally was able to get sober, even with a slip or a kind of a relapse as he was getting kind of started there. But anyway, June 10th, 1935 is his sobriety date, and it's a date that I think that is still to some extent celebrated by some of those that are more of the historian type with regard to AA. So we'll go from there.
Okay. I was born in a small New England village of about 7,000 souls. The general moral standard was, as I recall it, far above the average. No beer or liquor was sold in the neighborhood, except at the state liquor agency, where perhaps one might procure a pint if he could convince the agent that he really needed it. Without this proof, the expected purchaser would be forced to depart empty-handed with none of what I later came to believe was the great panacea for all human ills. Men who had liquor shipped in from Boston or New York by express were looked upon with great distrust and disfavor by most of the good townspeople. The town was well supplied with churches and schools in which I pursued my early educational activities.
And we're talking the date and place that we're referring to here is August 8th of 1879, and this is St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And it's an interesting kind of concept here where they were pretty much against alcohol. And I guess that as it's stated in here, that you had to go in and basically convince the store owner that you needed this pint in order to get anything. So I think it was one of those groups and areas where it was difficult at best to get a drink. And for a period of time, and certainly in Dr. Bob's life, that was absolutely the case. And although he does give a little bit of an inkling to the fact that he calls it the great panacea for all human ills, a belief that he later came to. Right?
Yeah. My father was a professional man of recognized ability, and both my father and mother were most active in church affairs. Both father and mother were considerably above the average in intelligence. Unfortunately for me, I was the only child, which perhaps engendered the selfishness which played such an important part in bringing on my alcoholism.
That's interesting too. Obviously, that he makes this statement that his being an only child created some selfishness, which also played in his becoming an alcoholic. So just as a note there, I think that this is going to be an interesting kind of thought. So just to keep that in mind. Rob?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in a couple of things about Dr. Bob's father. He was a judge, at times was the state's attorney, member of state's legislature, superintendent of schools, director of a bank, president of a bank, and also taught Sunday school. Now, teaching Sunday school, which meant Dr. Bob would have to go to church quite regular as one of the kids of the people that are running different social events at the church, which we will come to later on in the story. But Dr. Bob's father was a very, very bright man, as you can see. And with Dr. Bob being the only child, I'm sure that he was looked upon and expected to do well. From childhood through high school, I was more or less forced to go to church. Sunday school and evening service, Monday night Christian Endeavor, and sometimes to Wednesday evening prayer meeting. This had the effect of making me resolve that when I was free from parental domination, I would never again darken the doors of a church. This resolution I kept steadfastly for the next 40 years, except when circumstances made it seem unwise to absent myself.
Yeah, this is interesting that this mildly parallels Bill W.'s youth and upbringing. It's obvious that Dr. Bob got sick of being in church as much as he was, and because of the heavy dose of religion in his early life, he determined that that would be it and suffice him for the rest of his life, with some minimal exceptions. Rob?
Yep. After high school came 4 years in one of the best colleges in the country, where drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity. Almost everyone seemed to do it. I did it more and more and had lots of fun without much grief, either physical or financial. I seemed to be able to snap back the next morning better than most of my fellow drinkers, who were cursed or perhaps blessed with a great deal of morning after nausea. Never once in my life have I had a headache, which fact leads me to believe that I was an alcoholic almost from the start. My whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do, without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else, a state of mind which became more and more predominant as the years passed. I was graduated summa cum laude in the eyes of the drinking fraternity, but not in the eyes of the dean.
Yeah, a couple of things here. We're talking about Dartmouth College, is where he went in Hanover, New Hampshire. And also, I think it's kind of in our youth, and I'm going to raise my hand and say I was part of that ability to drink copious amounts of alcohol in an evening or night and then be able to bounce back the next day. For years seemed to be the way I was able to work. Never at that point, and I'm sure at this point he's not thinking of it either, that I was developing into a full-fledged alcoholic even at the point in time that I was in college, much like Bob indicates here. The other thing too is that he seems to be able to do his schooling and do quite well at it at this point. Although I'm sure that the alluding to the fact that while he was summa cum laude with regard to his drinking habits and that type of thing, that with the dean missing classes and missing tests and assignments, or at least not doing very well on them, could be an indication as well. So I think we'll hear from that a little bit more as we go along with regard to Dr. Bob's history and how much he struggled to try to make it through school. But, and this is kind of a getting ahead of ourselves, the fact of the matter is that it was really interesting that he was still able to get through school even with all of the drinking. Rob?
Yeah, which goes to show how intelligent that Dr. Bob was. Also Bill, even though he was drunk, was able to get through, night school classes. The one thing about this part of the story that really stuck out to me is when it talks about that my whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do. we read earlier in the book, selfishness, self-centeredness, that was the root of my problem. I stepped on the toes of others, and they retaliated. And, Dr. Bob, an only child, his whole, parents, his life was centered around him, so he's selfish and self-centered. Most alcoholics are. And that's one of the things that Dr. Silkworth noticed in the people that he couldn't get sober, is that they were selfish and self-centered. So let's keep going. The next 3 years I spent in Boston, Chicago, and Montreal in the employ of a large manufacturing concern, selling railway supplies, gas engines of all sorts, and many other items of heavy hardware. During these years, I drank as much as my purse permitted, still without paying too great a penalty. Although I was beginning to have morning jitters at times, I lost only a half day's work during these 3 years.
Yeah, so he's progressing, and we're seeing that he is still able to function as a contributing member of society. He's working in a facility where he's basically working for money in order to drink. So can't say that I necessarily relate to that, in that I didn't necessarily drink all of my earnings away, but nonetheless, I can tell you that I spent far too much money on alcohol throughout my life, and it would be interesting to see how much more money I would have at this point, potentially, had I not been a drinker, at least as heavy as I was. So, Bob?
I think we can all relate to that part, Leo, that if we had saved all our money, I could have had an airplane.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, well, here's the progress is beginning. And it's funny that Dr. Bob spent time in Montreal. Who else spent time in Montreal? Bill. It's funny how lives and, experiences and places all come together. My next move was to take up the study of medicine, entering one of the largest universities in the country. There I took up the business of drinking with much greater earnestness than I had previously shown. On account of my enormous capacity for beer, I was elected to membership in one of the drinking societies and soon became one of the leading spirits. Many mornings I have gone to class, and even though fully prepared, would turn and walk back to the fraternity house because of my jitters, daring not to enter the classroom for fear of making a scene should I be called on for recitation.
Yeah, so it's starting to get the best of Dr. Bob here. We are, in fact, talking, the medical school is the University of Michigan, and it is an interesting thing here that his jitters in the morning were causing him to miss class at this point on a regular basis. So it's also, too, that he's got to play on words here with elected in the membership of one of the drinking societies and soon became one of the leading spirits. So he certainly is tying all of this together. Rob?
Yeah, the jitters are getting to him. That's the alcohol leaving his system, and the body is craving the alcohol to go back in order to calm his nerves. And also I want to throw in, here's a guy who most of his life is spent drinking, but then he decides to go into the medical field. Wow, he, brilliant mind. He's got to be a brilliant guy, in order, when I think of doctors, I don't think of stupid people, that anybody can become a doctor. Their memory has to be sharp. Here he goes into medical school. What, wow. Quite the gentleman. This went from bad to worse until sophomore spring when, after a prolonged period of drinking, I made up my mind that I could not complete my course. So I packed my grip and went south to spend a month on a large farm owned by a friend of mine. When I got the fog out of my brain, I decided that quitting school was very foolish and that I'd better return and continue my work. When I reached school, I discovered the faculty had other ideas on the subject. After much argument, they allowed me to return and take my exams, all of which I passed credibly, but they were much disgusted and told me they would attempt to struggle along without my presence. After many painful discussions, they finally gave me my credit, and I migrated to another of the leading universities of the country and entered as a junior that fall.
So much to Rob's point here with regard to how smart and capable that Dr. Bob was. He was able to take an entire month off, come back, and in short order be able to pass all of his exams and do it with the enough of a grade that he had passed those classes. And as much as he was as smart as he was and as well as he did on his exams, it's obviously that there was some resistance with regard to the faculty and the struggle that he had. And that's obviously that probably was a major contribution for him to have left the University of Michigan and then go on to the next school, which we know now is in Chicago, and it's Rush University. So and Benjamin Rush, who this is named after, was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he also had, there was some correlation of alcohol and disease that Benjamin Rush contributed to. Rob?
Yeah, it's some interesting stuff. We throw up in the chat every once in a while. Hopefully you find it interesting. I hope you don't find it distracting from what the core message is. We throw it up there because a lot of people have been in the fellowship for quite a while, and it brings the story to life. To those that are just coming into the, into Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not as important. The most important thing is, how the people became sober. We're on page 174, Susan. Coming up to final exams.
Thank you, Rob.
Coming up to final exams, I went on a particularly strenuous spree. When I went in to write the examination, my hand trembled so I could not hold a pencil. I passed and leafed through absolutely blank books. I was, of course, soon on the carpet, and the upshot was that I had to go back for 2 more quarters and remain absolutely dry if I wished to graduate. This I did and proved myself satisfactory to the faculty, both in deportment and scholastically.
Yeah, so this is really, we didn't refer to it before, but when he took a month off and went to south to a farm and worked there, he obviously didn't drink during that period of time and dried out, as he put it. And then also here, an interesting fact that while very much in what we would consider as an alcoholic, was able for a short period of time to stay sober and not drink, which he did for 2 quarters at school and was able to get through school and graduate. So just to go and show you that even for me at times, when I was on a deployment with the Marine Corps and there was on a float and on a ship, during that time that we were, deployed into a combat zone, alcohol wasn't allowed. And so I would go several months without drinking, and but not without multiple times during that time that I wished I had a drink. And then getting back into it was kind of slow at first, but within a week, maybe 2, I was right back to my old self. And I'm sure that Bob probably experienced some of that similarly as well. Rob?
Yeah, I apologize to everybody. I missed a paragraph. I'll read that in a moment. But here is a similarity to Bill. Remember Bill when he was taking his law course? He was too drunk to write or to think. Here's Dr. Bob doing the same things. He's handing in absolutely blank books because he can't do the exam. His hand trembled so much he couldn't hold a pencil. What terrible things happen to us. But let me go back 1 paragraph that I missed, and I do apologize, everybody, because this is an important part. There, my drinking became so much worse, and the boys of the fraternity house where I lived felt forced to send for my father, who made a long journey in the vain endeavor to get me straightened around. This had little effect, however, for I kept on drinking and used a great deal more hard liquor than in former years.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. He had referred to himself as somebody that was very easily able to drink copious amounts of beer. And now he's making it known that instead of beer, he was drinking hard liquor. Alcohol, different alcohols, I will say, and I've read, so it's just not me and I don't know that it's necessarily scientific. It could just be anecdotally. I think that does affect people in different ways. Certainly, I can tell you that for me, different forms of alcohol caused me different forms of hangovers through the next day. So I'm sure that switching over to hard liquor, while it's less volume to get to the same result, the fact is he was drinking far beyond what he needed to, and they felt it necessary to call his father and have his father try to come in and get Bob back on his feet. Rob?
Yeah, you know what they say, Leo, liquor is quicker, right?
Yeah.
Than beer. So, that the whole idea is we want to get someplace. The quicker we can get there, the better. The other thing that I want to talk or mention is that, he stayed dry for a short period of time. He was able to do it. He had to white knuckle it, but he was able to stay away from liquor for a short period of time in order for, so the faculty, could see that he meant business. As I say, he must have been a brilliant man, to be in the throes of alcoholism, but his mind is still working and being able to, to do the medical information and the stuff. Oh, this floors me, because I remember near the end of my drinking, I just couldn't concentrate on anything, and here, this guy's going to be a medical doctor, with all the information that they throw at these doctors. I conducted myself so creditably that I was able to secure a much coveted internship in a Western city where I spent 2 years. During these 2 years, I was kept so busy that I hardly left the hospital at all. Consequently, I could not get into any trouble.
Yeah, real quick, we're talking about the City Hospital in Akron, Ohio. So, and as anybody knows, with regard to internships and residencies and that type of thing, it's a very demanding time in every doctor's career, and no doubt that he was putting in more hours than almost that the day had in order to keep going, and that unfortunately continues today. But nonetheless, I'm sure that this is absolutely true, that he was so busy at the hospital that he hardly ever had time to drink once he was off. Rob?
Yeah, when those 2 years were up, I opened an office downtown. I had some money, all the time in the world, and considerable stomach trouble. I soon discovered that a couple of drinks would alleviate my gastric distress, at least for a few hours at a time, so it was not at all difficult for me to return to my former excessive indulgence.
Yeah, so here it is that he quickly jumps back into his drinking, and from that he finds himself self-medicating with regard to trying to get some of the symptoms that he was experiencing, in this case some gastric discomfort. He was able to eliminate or at least minimize with a couple of drinks and be able to function. There's a lot of alcoholics out there that use alcohol just to get to back what would be considered a normal, and I'm using that word loosely, a normal activity and feeling. So, and I can admit that I would get to lunch sometimes and I would have the jitters myself. In fact, you guys have heard my story about this medication that I was taking in order to control my jitters, and thinking that I had a nervous system problem as opposed to my withdrawal from alcohol. But nonetheless, I would order a couple of drinks at lunch, and that would take care of it, and I would be good for the rest of the afternoon until that evening when I would start drinking again. So anyway, I can relate to this. Rob?
Okay, we're right at the bottom of page 174, everybody. By this time, I was beginning to pay very dearly physically, and in hope of relief, voluntarily incarcerated myself and at least a dozen times in one of the local sanitariums. In between Scylla and, I'll get this right, Charybdis, Now, because if I did not drink, my stomach tortured me, and if I did, my nerves did the same thing. After 3 years of this, I wound up in the local hospital where they attempted to help me, but I would not get my friends to smuggle me a quart, or I would steal the alcohol about the building, so that I got rapidly worse.
Been there, done that, I guess, with regard to trying to dry out and sneaking alcohol at the same time. I can say that I had talked to people and told them that I was in need of drying out, and then at the same time, behind the scenes, it'd be like I'm shaking their hand with one hand and I'm drinking behind their backs once they turned with the other. Back to Scylla and Charybdis, I think that what we really do mean here is between a rock and a hard place. So much easier to comprehend, and it's certainly much easier to say. So I'm not even sure that I'm getting the names or whatever here right. So between a rock and a hard place is where Dr. Bob found himself. Rob?
Yeah, well, Scylla is a rock on the Italian side of the Strait of Messina, opposite the whirlpool Charybdis, personified by Homer as a female sea monster who devoured sailors. Between Scylla and Charybdis is being in a spot where avoidance of one danger exposes one to destruction by the other. But so being in between place, you know. Interesting stuff they got in this book, I must admit. I love it. Finally, my father had to send a doctor out from my hometown and managed to get me back there in some way. And I was in bed for about 2 months before I could venture out of the house. I stayed about town a couple of months more and then returned to resume my practice. I think I must have been thoroughly scared by what had happened, or by the doctor, or probably both, so that I did not touch a drink again until the country went dry.
Yeah, fear gripped Dr. Bob, and that's what kept him sober for a period of time. It looks like a few months here with regard to what he's saying. And also, when the country went dry was on January 1st of 1920. So that's the time frame that we're looking at this point. And it's also interesting, too, that he was dry up until that point and then started drinking after the country went dry. So he was definitely one of those that was sneaking alcohol when it wasn't exactly legal. Rob?
Yeah, which just goes to show what they said earlier in the book, that alcoholics can go periods of being dry. But when they resume drinking, they start up just where they left off, if not worse. The allergy still kicks in. We are never rid of the allergy. We'll always have it. Therefore, we can never safely take that first drink. The problem is with any long-term sobriety, we think we can drink like a normal person because we haven't had it for a while. So with the passing of the 18th Amendment, I felt quite safe. I knew everyone would buy a few bottles or cases of liquor as their exchequers permitted, and that it would soon be gone. Therefore, it would make no great difference, even if I should do some drinking. At the time, I was not aware of the almost unlimited supply the government made it possible for us doctors to obtain. Neither had I any knowledge of the bootlegger who soon appeared on the horizon. I drank with moderation at first, but it took me only a relatively short time to drift back into the old habit which had wound up so disastrously before.
Yeah, so Dr. Bob is indicating that he's doing something that we all have tried, and that is that controlled drinking, where we're going to say, I'm not going to have any more than 2 drinks and then I'm done, or I'm not going to drink except on the weekends, or I'm only going to drink beer and nothing else. Nonetheless, any element of control that we put on our drinking is we're doomed to failure. And certainly that's the same thing that happened to Dr. Bob. Rob?
Yeah. During the next few years, I developed 2 distinct phobias. One was the fear of not sleeping, and the other was the fear of running out of liquor. Not being a man of means, I knew that if I did not stay sober enough to earn money, I would run out of liquor. Most of the time, therefore, I did not take the morning drink, which I craved so badly, but instead would fill up on large doses of sedative to quiet the jitter, which distressed me terribly. Occasionally, I would yield to the morning craving, but if I did, it would be only a few hours before I would be quite unfit for work. This would lessen my chances of smuggling some home that evening, which in turn would mean a night of futile tossing around in bed, followed by a morning of unbearable jitter. During the subsequent 15 years, I had sense enough never to go to the hospital if I'd been drinking, and very seldom did I receive patients. I would sometimes hide out in one of the clubs of which I was a member, and had the habit at times of registering at a hotel under a fictitious name, where my friends usually found me, and I would go home if they promised that I should not be scolded.
Yeah, he is using alcohol as a medication. That's something that we have talked about already, and this time he's really doing it to really calm things down. And we obviously know that he's going through the DTs on a daily basis now. And in fact, I would just say that it's constant. Unless he has alcohol in his system, he is experiencing the delirium tremens. Very hard time for Dr. Bob, and it's an extended period of time. I mean, we're talking 15 years of time here, and barely a patient, very little income, and what income he does have, he is spending on alcohol and barely making ends meet at home. So you can just imagine how futile and desperate he probably was during this period of time. Rob?
Yeah, I think of this as the hamster on the wheel. He is just on the wheel and he's going as fast as he can go. No relief in sight. 15 years, taking a sedative, to quiet his nerves, trying to make enough money in order to get liquor into the house so that he could have his drinks and then he could sleep at night. 50 years of the same dread over and over and over again. Think of how frustrating it must have been for him. If my wife was planning to go out in the afternoon, I would get a large supply of liquor and smuggle it home and hide it in the coal bin, the clothes chute, over door jams, over beams in the cellar, and in cracks in the cellar tile. I also made use of old trunks and chests, the old can container, and even the ash container. The water tank on the toilet I never used because that looked too easy. I found out later that my wife inspected it frequently. I used to put 8 or 12-ounce bottles of alcohol in a fur-lined glove and toss it onto the back airing porch when winter days got dark enough. My bootmaker had hidden alcohol at the back step where I could get it at my convenience. Sometimes I would bring it in my pockets, but they were inspected, and that became too risky. I used also to put it up in 4-ounce bottles and stick several on my stocking tops. This worked nicely until my wife and I went to see Wallace Berry in Tugboat Annie, after which the pant leg and stocking racket were out.
There's some humor here, but there isn't as well. He divulges all of the different places that he hid alcohol. I can tell you that from an experience that I had, because this was something that I did, and I used the garage to hide my alcohol. And for months after I stopped drinking, I would actually find bottles of alcohol that I had forgotten about. And when I was out in the garage doing something and moved something, I would be shocked and amazed that there it is, another bottle of alcohol. Myself using this idea, but it's if you can only imagine the struggle and the amount of work and energy and effort that went into not only drinking, but hiding the alcohol. It became, for me, something that was very tiresome. It wore me out because of the risk of getting caught. I was always in fear. It made me nervous. And when I was drinking behind people's backs, I was obviously known. I kept thinking that nobody knew, but certainly they did know. But nonetheless, it wasn't enjoyable drinking by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't enjoy it at all. I was at that point only trying to get the effects of alcohol and get that into my system and feel that, and very little relief and very little enjoyment, or in fact, there wasn't really any enjoyment at all at that point in time. Bob?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the other paragraph that I wrote, or they wrote, I apologize, that I read, that he would register at a hotel under a fictitious name. This man's name was Bob Smith. What fictitious name would he use? I always get Bill Bill from New Jersey mentioned that before, and I got a kick out of it, so I hope you did too. I will not take space to relate all my hospital or sanitarium experiences. During all this time, we became more or less ostracized by our friends. We could not be invited out because I would surely get tight, and my wife dared not invite people in for the same reason. My phobia for sleeplessness demanded that I get drunk every night, but in order to get more liquor for the next night, I had to stay sober during the day, at least up till 4 o'clock. This routine went on for a few with this routine went on with few interruptions for 17 years. It was really a horrible nightmare. This earning money, getting liquor, smuggling it home, getting drunk, wearing gender, taking large doses of sedatives to make it possible for me to earn more money, and so on ad nauseum. I used to promise my wife, my friends, and my children that I would drink no more. Promises which seldom kept me sober, even through the day, though I was very sincere when I made them.
Yeah, stuck in this loop. I can't imagine how maddening it was, obviously, for this period of time. And the amount of alcohol and sedatives that this man probably ingested has to be pretty amazing. And back to our point before, the amount of money that was wasted and spent on alcohol had to be quite high. But at this point in time, I can relate to the fact that I had gotten to the point where I had to use alcohol in order to calm things down, and found myself drinking not only at home but also at work at times. So quite different, I think, in that regard from Dr. Bob, but not far off. Bob?
Yeah, hiding alcohol everywhere. Can you identify with hiding alcohol? Normal drinkers don't do this. Okay. Also, Dr. Bob and his wife were losing friends. Bill became a lone wolf, if we remember earlier on in Bill's story. 17 years of making money, buying liquor, bringing it home, hiding it, drinking it, taking sedatives, repeat the next day. How many times have we promised that we would never do it again to our loved ones, and we do it again? Poor Dr. Bob. For the benefit of those experimentally inclined, I should mention the so-called beer experiment, when beer first came back, I thought that I was safe. I could drink all I wanted of that. It was harmless. Nobody ever got drunk on beer. So I filled the cellar full with the permission of my good wife. It was not long before I was drinking at least a case and a half a day. I put on 30 pounds of weight in about 2 months. Looked like a pig and was uncomfortable from shortness of breath. It then occurred to me that after one was all smelled up with beer, nobody could tell what had been drunk. So I began to fortify my beer with straight alcohol. Of course, the result was very bad, and that ended the beer experiment.
Yep, it's an interesting time for him in that he was, one, able to convince his wife that he should be able to drink beer and not get drunk. And obviously, not only was it that he took in multiple or copious amounts of calories, and that caused him to gain weight, and in the shortness of breath, he was getting out of shape. So that was it. It doesn't matter. Once you're drunk, it doesn't matter what you drink. People also can't say, "Oh, yeah, I can tell that you drink wine and got drunk in that regard." So alcohol is alcohol. It just is a matter of what volume you take in based on the type of alcohol that it's made into. And we're on page 178, Rob.
Yes, we are. As you say, liquor is quicker. And I was a beer drinker. That's what got me. And yeah, copious amounts of it. But boy, I always think of the fact that there's a meme on Facebook that I see every once in a while and saying 8 glasses of water a day is impossible, but 8 bottles of beer, it goes down so easily. So, it just makes no sense. About the time of the beer experiment, I was thrown in with a crowd of people who attracted me because of their seemingly poise, health, and happiness. They spoke with great freedom from embarrassment, which I could never do, and they seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared very healthy. More than these attributes, they seemed to be happy. I was self-conscious and ill at ease most of the time. My health was at the breaking point. and I was thoroughly miserable. I sensed they had something I did not have, from which I might readily profit. I learned that it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much, but I thought it could do no harm. I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight every night nevertheless. I read everything I could find and talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it.
Yeah, we have a courser talking about the Oxford Group in Akron, and this is time frame is plus or minus in the beginning of 1933 for Dr. Bob, and doing what he spending time with the Oxford Group. Obviously, being a doctor, he would have at least met the initial criteria of a socioeconomic level of life that would have been acceptable to them. So spending time with them is where he got started with regard to the spiritual nature that he speaks of. Rob?
Yeah, here we see that Bob did not identify with these people. Okay, Bob could identify with Bill. We'll find out a little bit later in the story. And that's the difference. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. These people couldn't get through to Dr. Bob, but Dr. Bob, God love him, gave it his best. Why did he give it his best? Because it was making his wife happy. He was finally doing something for somebody else. He was doing it for Anne because she was looking for anything that would help Dr. Bob. My wife became deeply interested, and it was her interest that sustained mine, though I at no time sensed that it might be an answer to my liquor problem. And my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years. I'll never know, but she did. If she had not, I know I would have been dead a long time ago. For some reason, we alcoholics seem to have the gift of picking out the world's finest women when they should be subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them. I cannot explain.
Yeah, it's interesting note here in regards to that. I can also tell you that my being married, being with my wife, it did in fact keep me in check a lot, and that minimized, I'd say, mildly minimized my drinking. But nonetheless, I can tell you that once I stopped drinking, there was a great amount of support and encouragement on her behalf, which certainly helped me as well. Rob?
Yeah, you know what, Leo, I can say the same thing. I've been married 42 years, and you know what, though my wife, I would have gone off the rails a lot quicker and sooner, and it was because of her that I decided to finally put my tail between my legs and get into the rooms of AA, find out what they could offer me. I've never looked back since. Thank God for that. And thank God for the people of AA. About this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. It was the day before Mother's Day, and I had come home plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I set down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. The next day she called again. Wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly, I said, let's make the call and extracted from my wife's promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes.
A little bit of humor here, I think, is kind of hidden in this with the carrying a big potted plant. Where and why did he bring that home is an interesting kind of question here, but just sitting it on the table, going upstairs and passing out, you can only imagine the look on his wife's face and stuff. And we're getting ready to meet Bill and Dr. Bob. So here we go. Rob?
Yep. We entered our house at exactly 5 o'clock, and it was 11:15 when we left. I had a couple of shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly. This dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend several days' meetings of a national society of which I was a member. I drank all the scotch they had on the train and bought several quarts on my way to the hotel. This was on Sunday. I got tight that night, stayed sober Monday till after the dinner, and then proceeded to get tight again. I drank all I dared in the bar, and then went to my room to finish the job. Tuesday, I started in the morning, getting well organized by noon. I did not want to disgrace myself, so I then checked out. I bought some more liquor on the way to the depot. I had to wait some time for the train. I remember nothing from then on until I woke up at a friend's house in a town near home. These good people notified my wife, who sent me my newly made friend over to get me. He came and got me home and to bed, gave me a few drinks that night and one bottle of beer the next morning.
Yeah, so Dr. Bob is on his last, well, what we'll call a relapse, because he stopped drinking for a period of time, maybe about 3 weeks, and then got royally drunk during a time that he was attending a medical society meeting, and doesn't even really make it to the meeting. He just makes it to the city where the meeting's at, gets really drunk, and then decides not to make a fool of himself, and finally comes home. Although he doesn't actually make it home, he makes it to a friend's house. So this is really good and drunk, and that blackout drunk at this point, and it's Dr. Bob and Bill. Obviously, Bill comes in and gets him and brings him home and starts to help him dry out, as we see at the very last of this paragraph, where he gave him a few drinks that night and then starts to wean him off as he gives him a bottle of beer the next morning. Bob?
Yeah, a couple of things here. Bill was able to get through to Dr. Bob. Remember, Dr. Bob said, we'll give him 50 minutes and then we'll get out of there. They talked for 6.5 hours. What could they have possibly talked about? Well, Bill talked about his own drinking. Another thing that is interesting is that they met on May 12th, 1935. That is the same day that Thomas Thatcher, the Grenadier soldier, passed away. Not 1935, obviously, it was a lot sooner, but it was the same date, May 12th. Is it odd or is it God? I just wanted to throw that in. Also, Dr. Bob had an operation to do. Dr. Bob was a proctologist, so he was working on people. Can you imagine having a proctologist working on you who is drunk? No, a little scary. And for Pete, I'm going to throw this in. Not only did Bill give him a few drinks or one bottle of beer the next morning, but he also gave him a goofball, which is sedative, in order to so his hands wouldn't shake. Because you don't want a proctologist that's hands are shaking like crazy when he's working on you. That was June 10th, 1935, and that was my last drink. As I write, nearly 4 years have passed. The question which might naturally come into your mind would be, what did the man do or say that was different from what others had done or said? It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. But this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had had most all of the drunkard's experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means I had been trying to employ. That is to say, the spiritual approach. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. Of far more importance was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked who knew what he was talking about in regard to alcoholism from actual experience. In other words, he talked my language. He knew all the answers, and certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading.
Yeah, this is like one of the top 5 things about AA and the beliefs and the proof that is one alcoholic can win over another alcoholic within just a short period of time. When you talk the same language as the alcoholic that you're trying to get to recover, it makes a big difference. And obviously it made enough difference here that they italicized that section of the paragraph. But the couple of things is that, of all of the studying and medical advice he had been given in order to stop drinking, and undoubtedly at the time, certain medications to take, et cetera, you can only imagine how frustrating and defeated he probably was in regards to his ability to stop drinking, and how amazed and excited he became once he was able to stop drinking due to a spiritual approach to it and working with Bill Dudley. Rob?
Yeah, what did Bill talk to or tell Dr. Bob? He told him about what Dr. Silkworth told Bill. When drinking, we develop the phenomenal craving, and when we don't drink, we get restless, irritable, discontented, until we find the ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Then the allergy kicks in, and we can't control the amount. Dr. Bob could identify with this. Remember, Dr. Bob was with the Oxford group, which got Ebby sober, So, this is what Dr. Bob was looking for, a solution to his drinking. It is a most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. Sense of duty. It is a pleasure, because in doing so, I am paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip.
Absolutely. Working with others certainly does work with me and helps me get a full dose of sobriety. And that insurance is certainly something I have come to appreciate. It's amazing at how much things improve once you stop drinking, and your sense of well-being, your health, the respect, the way people look at you, the way you're able to interact with other people, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also nice there is that Dr. Bob thinks enough of it that he's giving back. And not only is he giving back, but he enjoys doing so. Right?
Yeah, Dr. Bob, sense of duty. It is a pleasure, because in doing so, I am paying my debt to the man who took the time to pass it on to me. Because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. This is why we do it. Thank God for Dr. Bob. Thank you to Bill and W, and all that they're teaching us. Leo, it is 12:54. Can we bring in Mr. Bill?
Well, we only have 2 more paragraphs.
Oh, do we? Oh, I apologize. Okay, so I'll read the whole thing for it.
Yep.
Unlike most of our crowd, I did not get over my craving for liquor much during the first 2.5 years of abstinence. It was almost always with me, but at no time have I been anywhere near yielding. I used to get terribly upset when I saw my friends drink and knew I could not, but I schooled myself to believe that though I once had the same privilege, I had abused it so frightfully that it was withdrawn. So it doesn't behoove me to squawk about it, for after all, nobody ever had to throw me down and pour liquor down my throat. If you think you are an atheist or an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you are strong enough to beat the game alone, that is your affair. But if you really and truly want to quit drinking liquor for good and all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails. If you go about it with 1/2 the zeal you have been in the habit of showing when you were getting another drink, your Heavenly Father will never let you down.
Absolutely. And we're, of course, talking, and I go back to page 23, then about 2/3 of the way down there, it says there is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, which is one of the great obsessions of all alcoholics. And that is certainly something that he's referring to here. And obviously, this is important. Sometimes I still get the urge, and I know that it creeps up on me every once in a while, but they're fleeting now and becoming more and more or less and less frequent, I guess is the way I would say it. So with that, I would just say that this is an excellent story. It's a great ending to us reading the book, and this is certainly at the very bottom here is that they do have, in fact, an answer for you. And with that, I will ask Mr. Bill S. to add a couple of words, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, guys. It's a real good story here. Dr. Bob, you can see the progression that he went through. He started drinking, and he kept drinking more and more and more, and he started getting in trouble. You can see the parallels between him and Bill Wilson. They were both cut from the same cloth, if you want to say. They came out of the same mold. They both went to school. They had to take their final exams, and they couldn't do it because of alcohol. You know, it's showing you how both of them were basically in the same thing, and how they were losing their friends over it. Like Rob mentioned, Bill became a lone wolf, and in here it says that Dr. Bob and his wife were ostracized by their friends. Basically, alcohol was destroying both of their lives. They were both going through the same thing. And then, when this woman, Henrietta Seiberling, gave Bill the instructions on how to get in touch with Dr. Bob, she called up Dr. Bob and Bill at the same time and got them both over her house. And when Dr. Bob went over there, he said he was only going to stay 15 minutes. And he wound up staying over 6 hours because Bill was making sense to him. Bill was talking his language. That's what it says in here. Bill wasn't telling him, why don't you quit drinking? Why don't you use your willpower? Why don't you grow up and knock it off? Blah, 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 blah. You know, all the stuff that we hear. Bill didn't say that. Bill told him how Bill drank. And when Bill wanted to stop, he couldn't. And Dr. Bob was saying, hey, wait a minute, I got to listen to this guy because he's talking about the same thing that happens to me. That's what makes this thing work, the identification. Now, you know, imagine if Dr. Bob would have only stayed 15 minutes and would have got up and walked out instead of staying 6 hours. We probably wouldn't be here. All these little pieces of this puzzle that fit together. Somebody was watching over all of this stuff when it took place because how all of this stuff happened, I don't know. All I know is they went through this. Dr. Bob and Bill got sober. They started this program, and thank God for that because all of us are here because of both of those guys. That's all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
You bet.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Excellent. All right. Rob, we'll close out with the serenity prayer and open things up.
You got it, Leo. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.